Hey, listeners, just two short notes before you get into this episode. First, I was having some audio issues and some software issues, and so the audio quality from my end was a bit lower than what I set the standard for myself. And so just know that following this episode, I've got it all fixed. And so the audio quality should be back to where it has been in previous episodes, if not, hopefully better. And the second note, I had some unexpected dental work the morning of this interview, and so I was having difficulties talking, and you'll hear that as I've talked a little bit different when I do come up and speak. And secondly, to that second part, I was also having issues carrying the conversation as well as I would have liked. Again, that was just because of the unexpected dental work, and my face was coming down from being very numb. So that being said, I really hope you enjoy this episode. I think it is a nice little tag in with the other episodes that we've had. With that, let's get to the episode. Yeah, if you want, I'm absolutely down for that. Like I said, it's the guest experience, so if they do want to do it that way, I'm more than happy to accommodate.
Cool. Let me see why my levels are weird, and then we can start. Why am I so quiet? What's going on here? All right, this is just a day of audio weirdness. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, no. From my perspective, I'd rather us talk.
Absolutely. Okay.
That's my whole thing. I work better talking to someone, having interactions with people, in terms of my like creative abilities. So I would love to just like us talk. So like when you invited me on the show, I mentioned that I had two interests in the show. One, I'm very open about my OCD, and the other is I'm investigating a cult. And I'm kind of trying to bring cult education and just documentaries in general about stuff, like making it more accessible for the lay person to have fun and like actually understand it. So which of those two was the more interesting to you?
Well, the purpose of the show is just to talk about like mental health. And so, like, in the beginning, let's just focus on talking about mental health, and then we can start to bring in the podcast and investigations.
What I think is so interesting about cults, though, is it is mental health. A lot of people think it's this belief system, but what we've learned, that's the reason that I wanted to come on, what we've learned, it has nothing to do with beliefs. It all has to do with the mental health of seeing cultic patterns in your life, seeing people that would manipulate you, that want you to believe stuff, that want you to I mean, the pathways to get someone to join your cult and the pathways that an abuser gets you to follow them in the same way and be loving towards them, they're identical. They're virtually the same. And the thing that we found shocking is when we started doing cult stuff and we talked about how do you get someone into a cult, the response was, oh man, that's exactly like this abuser I was with. Or, oh wow, that's exactly how this happened. And when we went to the cult experts with that, they said, yep, it's the same thing.
So with that in mind, then, definitely want to hear that in the show. But with that understanding now wrapped up, then absolutely, let's go with this. Just talking about it all the way through, wrapped up in the whole conversation, instead of kind of trying to separate it and then bring it in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think so if I was already starting. Is this? Did you? We can still keep going, right? Like I want that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like for me, I think that with having OCD and being really open about OCD, I think that there's a lot of say nothing things in the world of mental health, like ending a stigma or whatever. And I think that one of the things that we don't do is like talking practicalities. And so we're really trying to be like, hey, here's a practical way to do things. And like, what is the practical way for me to talk about mental health? And that's to like point out signs of like looking at yourself in life. Like I think that if there's a problem with mental health in the world, it's that we use words like mental health, which have nothing to do with like what I'm going on with my OCD and what someone who's in an abusive relationship is going on with and what someone in a cult is. What do you think about that idea? It's just like even just as a thought experiment, using the word mental health, like, well, what is ending the stigma of mental health? Does it just mean talking about therapy? Well, like, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. But it doesn't really have to do with like my condition or anyone else's condition. You know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Just like what is really ending the stigma around, mental health. And I don't know, it's like that's almost too broad to really give any kind of like answer to. You really got to just break it down even further into, focusing on like talking about it or like normalizing utilizing counseling services. They're all kind of like these roots to the big tree that is mental health. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. And I think that that's why like saying something like, "Oh, we just got to do something about mental health." It's like we've come across this analogy, which I think is interesting, even though we've actually spoken to some people who have worked in the anti-smoking world, and I've had some brush-ups with the anti-smoking world because of their tactics. But people have said, okay, compare it to anti-smoking, and someone said to us, well, look, you need like in order to stop the cult that you're going after, you need like the same fervor that people had to stop smoking, and with investigating the cult, that kind of works. It's like, hey, if we get the word out there that mgtow, you can go to mgtowasacult.com, or #cult.org. And we're explaining how people use the internet in new ways to create a cult. Great. You can learn what a cult is. Great. Like that's actionable. Look for the signs in your life of a cult. Like that's a mental health sign that everyone can do. Who's trying to coerce you? Who's trying to get you like on your team or to do your multi-level marketing or to whatever. That's something you can look out for. Who's trying to get you into an abusive, crappy relationship, right? Like that's actionable. And so the comparison to anti-smoking works, right? Because it's like, what do you want people to do? Oh, stop smoking. Great. Actionable. And the stigma of mental health, like in all those reasons you list, it's like, I don't know. Like that's so broad. Like what would you like asking people if they need help? Like, okay, that's good, but like maybe they're not ready to go. And so what? Do you ask them every single day if they need mental health help? Like talking about being in therapy, I think that's an interesting angle. Like there's no actionable item of just ending, just like it's pretty much like saying like just stop being racist. Just go ahead and stop having your prejudices. Like that's essentially what you're asking people to do when you're like, let's just end the stigma of mental health. And it's like, for the most part, the people that can end it are either doctors in the field or they're really, really great cases of people that, have been through treatment and do all these different things. I'm in a weird, unique opportunity where I talk about my OCD on air and talk about how I feel about it. And you're also one of these people too, right? You can take a platform. It's distant, but like, are you going to talk about it at a party? Maybe. If someone, for example, has a total freak out, a total panic attack in a social setting, is everyone forgiving of them in having a panic attack? Do you stop and examine if it's a panic attack? Like that's the part that I find a challenge when we talk about mental health. And what's interesting to me and making it more accessible to the layperson is like, what do you mean by that? You can't just talk in like grandiose terms,
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point. Like how, you could be in a room full of people that are like, let's normalize mental health or counseling service or anything. But like how I'm just picturing it in my head, like how that room would react if somebody suddenly had, a random fit or, a random panic attack. How would they react to that too? And I guess it would also depend like which Are they coming from just, you know, saying, are they all people that just say, we need to make sure that everybody has access to services? Or are they people that are like mental health, like advocates who are actively like working with, caseloads? Like,
it would be almost impossible to get a straight answer out of anyone. And so there's this weird, like, to me, when I come at this not as an expert in mental health, my only expertise in mental health is my own diagnosis, and how crazy I am. So, like, when I come at these things, I'm always like, what is my connection to it? How can I, as a layperson, make it something that people care about? And I get really upset at say nothing things, just as a person. Say, like, let's take care of, let's not have the stigma towards mental health. Well, okay, let's it's the same as saying, like, peace on earth. It's a great sentiment, but outside of a pillow, it's not, it's not really going to do anything. So it's like, yeah, peace on earth. I'm in favor of it. What would you like to do about it? Oh, I don't know. Just peace. I want peace. Okay, great. Well, what do I do if I'm attacked? Yeah, but peace on earth. Yeah, that's okay, but you're not, like, like, how do we make an actionable thing? Not to say that being attacked is some legitimate reason to not have peace on earth, but the point is that the analogy starts to make a lot more sense when you start to think, like, okay, most of your listeners, right, are going to be like, I don't want there to be a stigma towards mental health. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, what's next? And I bet they know people in their life, some of your listeners, who are like, oh, I do X. I work at X job. That's how we'll end it. But I bet they know people in their life that if they were to confront them and go, what do you think I mean when I say end the stigma of mental health? And they'll be like, just end, that's just getting rid of, they won't have a how. They'll just stutter. They won't have a how. And my role is to be a layperson and go, how do you make it interesting? How do you make it funny? How do you make it accessible and understandable? We're trying to be like the Bill Nye of mental health things. There's this attitude on the internet, and I just did an episode about it in #ColdPodcast. It's like, you don't have to be insufferable to be smart. You can be, like, fun and nice. Like, especially for me, like, I've been through hell in mental health. People in my life have been through hell in mental health. People in my life have been through coercive, abusive relationships. I've had brush-in with cults. I know cult members. I've lost people to cults. Like, while we're educating people about it, they're not going to jump in, just because we're being super serious. We can enjoy it and get more people to care,
Absolutely. And that kind of just reminds me, of the whole purpose of this show, Silent Journeys, is that, like, I'm not trying to be like this big thing where it's like, this show is ending the stigma. My contribution to that tree is simply providing a space where voices can come and they can get it out and say what they've been wanting to say, and they don't feel totally comfortable saying it, directly to people around them. It's just like, you come on here, and if you want to vent for 5 minutes, you can vent. Or if you want to talk about, like, the experiences that actually led to you, if you want to talk about the trauma that actually led to, your depression or your PTSD, like, this is also that space. And so it's just like sharing these stories to make sure, or to not to make sure, but to show others that people have similar experiences, and there are lots of others that are also experiencing, anxiety similar to yours. Here's a story of, that person.
Yeah, I'll share a story like that in the vein of the other guests too, because my whole thing is I started podcasting because I want to interact with people. I started in stand-up comedy. I felt as though I developed a style after I had sort of done the classic thing and wanted people to interact, and I felt as though audiences really had to be there for you and get what you were doing for it to work. And so I was like, well, I'll move to podcasting where people know that. So I like to interact with you, so thank you for doing my episode talking to me. But, like, I'll share a story in the vein of some other guests. Like, I think sometimes when we think of mental health prejudice as someone with, a diagnosed OCD, what you think people think is like, well, yes, it's the people in your life that don't get it, and it's the people that don't know what mental health is. And yeah, that happens too. I've had it at doctors' offices. I've had it with my GM, who was the same person who I went to a therapist So they weren't a psychiatrist, they were a psychologist, whichever one it is. I don't know. I just paid them money to make my brain better. But so my prescriptions were given by somebody else. And this doctor prescribed me those things, you know? And yet I came to their office and had a panic attack, and they were totally unsympathetic. So we sometimes think, and I had it at a dentist too, where someone working there was acting totally strange, and I walked out. Because I was like, this is a weird way to act, and like it's creating OCD in me. I have to leave. And they were totally prejudicial. And it took sitting down with the people running the office, the head doctor, to be like, this was weird, and this is why, for anyone to even start to get it. So like, that's to say, your credentials don't give you not a blind spot. Like, there's somebody listening to this with way more credentials than me, who's like, oh, like, I get it. I get the problems with this. Everyone has this problem because, in my opinion, you can't operate in life going around being not prejudicial towards mental health. The whole affliction of mental health is that the way you're acting, the way your brain is making you act, doesn't fit with the norms that allow you to be happy, whatever those may be. You can't fit into society. You're upset. You can't find a network, a way to exist in this world. So if you're afflicted with something that makes you act contrary to the way the average person is operating, how can you go around? It's an impossibility to go around and not be prejudicial towards someone like me when they have a thing. That of course it's going to happen, because if I'm reacting, let's say, to, and I'll use a real example, like someone moving something of mine over and over and over again. And I have a thing with organization. I just need to be able to find stuff. Now, if I start freaking out and really being crazy about it, and really like having a panic attack and being scared, and because you moved something, now your initial reaction is not going to be, well, this is OCD, unless maybe you know me and you've been around that trigger before. Your initial reaction is going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what are you going on about? Why are you acting this way? As is what you should do. And not everyone's going to be able to do that calmly and be able to take that. And guess what? Your calm attitude towards that person might not end what they're going through. It probably is likely out of their control already. So this idea that, you're just going to be not prejudiced towards mental health makes no sense. You'd have to operate in this very odd way, and that's an easy scenario where I'm around the person, where I can go afterwards, hey, like, I have OCD. I'm sorry I freaked out, whatever. Think about all the people that you run into in the world. You don't know if they have some mental health struggle they're going through. You don't know the phone call, the person you talk to, they're going through something. I mean, it's fairly likely. What is it? 1 in 5 people at this moment are going through some sort of mental health crisis. Now, if it's a man, they're likely not seeing treatment. So you have a pretty good chance that every 5th dude you talk to is an untreated person with something he's going on, statistically. And so even beyond that, they might not be seeking treatment. And then the people that are in treatment, it's like, well, what are they going to tell everyone? They're going to call the pizza place that you work at? You know what I mean? They're not going to call back and go, hi, is this Joni's Pizza? When I screamed before about the pepperoni, that was, I have a condition. No, it is private to a certain extent. And I have the privilege of being bold and outgoing in my personality. When I do things, I have to talk. I have to create entertainment. But the idea that medical conditions shouldn't be private, it again, it's like, we don't do this for other things that definitely have a stigma. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, there's no eliminate the stigma of incontinence. You know what I mean? Like, because it's private. Because it's a private thing that you go through, and people should be sensitive to it. But it's actually degrading to mental health to be like, we're going to get rid of the stigma. It's like, it's a medical condition. Okay, get rid of the stigma of people going to therapy. That's actionable. Talk about going to therapy. Be a guy like me, which the group we're investigating is a thing. They're afraid of therapy, which lots of men are. Just say you go. I had my therapist early this morning. I've already been to therapy on this exact day, you know? And people are really reticent to say that as if you're crazy. I mean, which I am, but I'm the least amount of crazy that I can be. It's there's no one straight answer. And it's been interesting to do it with a condition. I'm sure you've had this too. It's great to do it with a condition. Not great. It's so much fun that there's suffering in the world. It's very interesting to do it with a condition you don't have, where I'm not stuck in a cult. I've only had brush-ins with abusive relationships, and I've had more than brush-ins with abusive relationships, but I've had brush-ins with abusive relationships. I've had brush-ins with cults. And so it's very easy. Right now I'm not in that, to kind of look at this stuff from a sort of third-party perspective. Now, there's people in my life that are still suffering from the abuse and things they've gone through. And so there is that close connection. And I am able to talk to them more about what they're going through and through this investigation. But honestly, even that's not nearly as important as like listening to them and hearing what they're going through. So it's not, you can't really create a sensitivity to it. It almost makes mental health people into some sort of creed or race. It's not, it's a disease. It's a sickness. It's a mental health illness. And that's what those people are going through. I think all you can do is really promote inventorying. And that's what I've learned through learning about cults is like, we made this great video, and I'm happy to give this audio to anyone that wants to use it in their podcast about how someone creates coercive control and how a cult gets formed. And like, it's been really interesting to see 3 things happen. One, seeing the juxtaposition between cult and abuse, and having people who've been abused reach out and be like, wow. And people in my life be like, that's exactly what that person did to me. The second thing is seeing people in the group we're investigating, which we're the first to classify it as a cult, mgtow, which is a men's rights red pill cult. Having them say to us, yeah, like it was a cult. This is making it make a lot more sense for me. And then the third thing is when you tell people, hey, these are the signs to look out for a coercive group, they go, that is why that person was trying to do to me. I couldn't figure out what this person wanted from me and the way they were treating me in the irrational way. Or, oh man, I was sucked into some affiliate selling. I was sucked into some motivational speakers thing, you know? And they go, that was definitely coercive things. There's a spectrum. And so I think being aware, like, I'm down in the dumps. I'm to an irregular point of view. You know, we have some of that stuff happening now with like certain mental health things, but you need to just start, in my opinion, like learning about any scenario that can happen to you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot to unpack there. Could you clarify what a red pill cult is, though, for me?
Sure, absolutely. So red pill cults there was a internet trend of this idea springing from the movie The Matrix and from pickup artists who will claim they can kind of get you girls using pseudoscience. And this turned into red pill, which is learning the truth that women are just after you and that women are manipulatable and creatures that can be manipulated. That's red pill on the internet. It's a hashtag in itself. Red pill cults are groups that we've identified as cults because they use coercive control. They use abusive tactics. They want unbridled control over these people's lives. The philosophy, they want every man on earth to use this philosophy as to save the world. And there are groups within them, within Red Pill, that are cults. mgtow is one of them, mgtow. And you can go to mgtowasaCult.com and see our podcast, see our stuff about it. And they've transformed from what was ignorant bigotry and pseudoscience and misogyny into coercing, scaring, targeting, and embracing young men who are afraid of mental health, who are afraid of relationships, who don't know anything about relationships, who are angry, who are suicidal. One of the things that they definitely target is MGTOW Saves Lives is their moniker in a lot of places. And they will imply anytime there's a suicide that it has to do with a straight girl taking advantage of a straight male. And, you know, these are all they have terms, thoughts, and all these different simps and blue pill and red pill. These are their words of indoctrination, not my beliefs. But they use that for men who are scared of getting therapy, of being in relationships, who don't know anything about the world, are just angry about something else, who feel unheard, and they indoctrinate them in. And there's different levels of it. So that's what we're sort of trying to, as a man, I feel responsible to try and stop this, not just because of the women in my life that are affected by abusers and the fact that this group does kind of promote attitudes that will create more abusers, definitely. But other guys I know, friends that I've had, a friend that I had that was sucked into it, friends that I've had that feel like they could have been sucked into this. And like, I think it's a role of men to stop a cult like this, not just any cult to stop it, but like to get the word out there on like being a better man and stopping this whole 10,000 year cycle of abuse that we're in between men and women, and just men and men, and women, because that's the other thing that mgtow robs of these people, is they have decided that it's only men and women that have these things. They don't really understand the abuse between two gay men, two women, two trans. It doesn't make any sense to them. They rob the actual discussion on the internet and making any progress.
Okay. I see. So how did you get into this investigation?
So I had a friend who started to act terribly towards me, and started to say weird things about dating and different stuff. And he was really isolating himself from me. And so I kind of said, like, do you like not want to spend any time with me? To which I would have been fine with, but his reasoning was this group. And I felt an obligation as a friend to try and reach out. And so we made a video about our intervention. Now, I didn't know that he was going to be this extreme, that he was going to be in mgtow. I didn't know that he was going to have these beliefs. From hearing it, from knowing about the people in my life that were abused, from losing a friend, I felt as though we could do two things. One, investigate this thing. And two, learn about cults in a real way. Because a lot of cult stuff is just very dark and like, you know, it's distant. It's distant from the problem. It's not actually talking about the problem. It becomes this spooky thing that doesn't happen to everybody. And the more we talk to cult people, the more we talk to abuse victims, the more it's like, that happened to me. I think that's happening to me. Someone's trying to coerce me. Yeah, definitely. That's the way people acted in this cult. And so it was this thing of like, I really want to bring understanding abuse, understanding mental health problems, understanding the internet to a different perspective, which is to say the internet is not... Look, my main motivation for keeping going with this thing, once I learned about the cults, was my discovery of hashtag cults. Being able to hide in plain sight and say, oh, we're just this thing. We're just a hashtag. We're just using it. My motivation to keep going was that the world doesn't operate that way. People are not just on the street when I'm wearing an outfit shouting like, oh, those shoes make you look fat. But yet they are on the internet. And it's this phenomena that we refuse to address. And we just say, oh, that's the internet. It's like, well, is it? So is it the anonymity thing? Is it the other stuff? To what we found was there's a large section of people scapegoating on the internet. You know? And that is a mental health issue. That's a real actionable issue that if we could get rid of that stuff, you know, we did an equation once on the show, which was like, let's say it's a generous number, half of the men with mental illness are not seeking treatment. Okay. So you've got 1/4, and then you've got 1/5 of men at any time suffering from some sort of mental health problem. So you can take any user base of a social media platform, and generally, to a large extent, because a lot of people use social media, it's almost the whole population, Find out how many users there are on Facebook, find out 1/5 of them, and divide that by 2, and that's how many people might not be in their best mind commenting on the internet. So it's a real issue to say that the internet is just screaming and shouting and that's the way it is. I thought we could impact that. I thought we could show that goes a lot farther. There's this group here that's hiding in plain sight, being like, oh, we're fine. And that was as a journalist, that's what captured me. There were all these really big reasons, really like important life reasons that I wanted to look into this and I wanted to help stop this. But the reason I kept doing the podcast and we're making a documentary about it, and we've talked to members who are still in the group and people that have left the group as well, leaders of it, sort of villains of their group as well, cult experts. The reason the story is that they're hiding in plain sight. You may know someone in this group. You probably know someone in mgtow or involved in Red Pill, especially if you know someone who's been through divorce or who's younger.
That's crazy.
And I know we've got to wrap up here, but I think that if I can make a closing statement. I hope I was clear today. I hope it got you interested to want to go and start to think about these issues more critically and in a fun way.
It's to kind of go off a note from earlier. It is kind of interesting because I'm 25, and so I was pretty much raised on the internet of like, don't feed the trolls. That's been the dialogue for so long, and I feel like that has given rise to things like mgtow, their ability to actually form, because people don't respond to this or like try to stop them on the internet until like this year. That dialogue has changed to being, no, we need to clap back. Like, we can't just see something on like a message board and just like don't feed into it. Now we need to actually address it. So I wonder if mgtow would not have been able to spread as quickly if that dialogue had existed, earlier on in the age of the internet.
It did. I have a whole lot of opinions on comments. I think you need to show people love so they feel the love that they can lead. And I think that there's only 2 responses when people clap back. It's they want to say, screw you, F you, and they yell at them. Well, they're not going to leave a cult. No one ever. I've talked to Chris Shelton, who was a member of Scientology for 27 years. And he said, every time that somebody did something flagrant and yelling and aggressive, it made me stay in longer. That's never what got people out. And so I think a loving dialogue and being like, it's okay. It seems like you're hurting. I hope that you can get help. That's a good thing too. But this dialogue of unmoderated forums, we have a lot of opinions about comment sections just being open and not moderated by anyone. This came up. We've talked about it. There were forums shut down because they didn't have the manpower or the money to moderate them. This came up very early in the internet. And the decision was amongst an internet that had more culpability in terms of your own financial investment. The opinion of people that were culpable. And by the way, there was a decision in Australia that says that a social media provider or a provider of something with comments and a forum, that the actual provider, like, you may be culpable. If someone leaves a comment on my video, I may be culpable for being for damages and things like that. That's a new decision coming up. And making people financially, in Australia, you could be financially on the hook for something in your comment section. And those changes are coming. When you had to host your own server and host your own forum, it was very early. You can find lots of issues in the internet of shutting down MSN Messenger, for example, because they didn't have the manpower to moderate it and they thought it was problematic. It was there. One of the things for me as a filmmaker, I think is a great way to end it on, is their companies are based on something called disruption. And when you disrupt things, you don't have stability. So if you're on a site that wants to be a disruptor, there might not be stability. And taking accountability for the actions of people on the internet is now something that is swinging back around with financial. When the internet was smaller, the cops were knocking on the doors of, hey, did you know all these pedophiles are using your forum? They were knocking on the doors. Now it's become, there's some internet-y laws that say that if a user posts it, it's a whole other. You can look into the story of Backpages to learn this law, but we are swinging around. I can, for example, if you post this on Facebook and someone posts something derogatory, as a journalist, I can take your face, your profile photo, and your name and publish your comment. I can sue you for libel for the comment you said. In Akron, Ohio, one woman lost $25,000, I think, for some comments she made about a company. It is coming back around, and it will take stories like that to say, like, hey, you need to show love when someone's clearly crying out for it. Someone doesn't just randomly start shouting mean stuff. Someone just doesn't start doing that. There's a reason behind it. And you need to start taking culpability for the fact that you can create a MGTOW forum to be misogynistic and eugenic by simply making a video on YouTube and titling it MGTOW, and you can put a picture of a duck, whatever you want, and below it, it will become a MGTOW forum full of hate. That's the way the internet works right now. And that's the main thing that we're trying to investigate is clapping back is probably not a great idea. Clapping back in terms of our behavior as men, our behavior as well-adjusted men, in terms of reaching out and showing sympathy. But your aggression is not going to fix theirs. And I think that we do have this evidence that it happened in the internet earlier. It's now time for a revelation. There's this word that people use whenever we bring up get rid of the comments section, which is something I say. Get rid of the comments section. And when people go, they go, what about discourse? And I go, what discourse have you had on the internet comment section? Where are these great philosophers having wonderful conversations in the comments on YouTube? Because I haven't seen them. I see wholehearted agreement and vicious vitriol. I never see a wonderful dialogue. So if we're just going to sit here, it's the same with any mental health thing. We can sit here and pretend it doesn't happen, and it'll get worse. You know, that's what you as someone who's in treatment have to realize. It's like, yeah, I can just sit around and pretend it's not happening. Cool. And you will feel worse. And that's my attitude as to why all of this ties together and what motivates me to do all these things and why I can't separate them right now with this. Maybe I'll come back on when we finish the movie and talk about how I'm just crazy in one way instead of trying to fix anything on the internet. But right now they're inexorably tied.
Well, I would say that's a good place to wrap this up.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop recording if I can